Good morning, it's today again. Welcome back to Joseph's Reserves. I'm Joseph and I store 20% of my income in the form of rare coins and precious metals. Have you ever heard someone say that gold is impractical for transactions? I hear it all the time. Many stackers can only imagine spending or bartering with silver. The argument usually goes something like this. Gold is too valuable. You can't buy groceries with it. You can't make change. You can't realistically use it day to day in commerce. Most often, preppers will use the example you don't want to be stuck buying a can of beans with a 1 ounce gold coin. And because of that, many people conclude that gold, while useful for storing wealth, might not be particularly useful as money. And at first glance, it sounds reasonable. After all, gold is over $4,000 per ounce, and who's going to walk into a store and spend a 1 ounce gold coin? A 1 ounce gold coin today represents a significant amount of purchasing power, but it always has. So here's the question that changed the way that I think about this topic. If gold is so impractical for transactions, why did gold circulate for centuries? Congratulations to Silver Serpents, not only for getting to my comment section first in yesterday's video, but also for finally hitting 500 subscribers. Congratulations, my friend. You deserve it. You've been putting in that work. So the general thoughts of prepper stackers or stackers who accumulate the metals with the idea that they will need to barter them in the future is that gold is not practical to be able to spend. But then how did gold coins circulate for centuries? Not just exist or sit in bank vaults as a storage of wealth, not just stowed away for wealthy families, but actually circulated. They actually changed hands and they actually got spent. I think it has to do with something very simple. When we look at gold coins that dominated circulation throughout history, something interesting appears. Most of them weren't 1 ounce coins. Actually, none of them were 1 ounce. Sure, some were close, but most successful gold coins in history contain somewhere between 1/5 and 1/4 of an ounce of gold. And that's where we begin today's video. Right here on the table, I have several examples. The British sovereigns, European 20 francs. I'll soon pull out an American $5 gold coin, and then some modern 1/4 ounce eagles and 1/4 ounce Australian lunar dragons. These coins are from different countries, different governments, different centuries, and different monetary systems altogether. Yet they all seem to cluster around the same amount of gold, 1/5 to 1/4 of an ounce. And I don't think that's by accident. I think that size occupied a very specific role in the economy, what I like to call transactional gold. Now, before we go any further, I want you to picture something. Imagine in the late 1800s, you're a farmer and you've just sold a head of cattle. Or maybe you're a carpenter who just completed a large project. Maybe you're a merchant settling accounts with another merchant. You don't pull out a credit card or send a wire. You can't open up a banking app on your phone and receive payments that way. You have to receive real money. Maybe a sovereign or a few sovereigns. Maybe a half eagle. Maybe a handful of 20 franc pieces. Those coins represented something meaningful. They represented meaningful purchasing power. Not enough to buy a house, not enough to retire, but enough to handle important transactions. Maybe you're buying livestock, you're purchasing tools, or you're paying for rent. Maybe you're purchasing supplies for your business, maybe you're settling a debt. These weren't daily purchases, but they weren't rare either. They were simply a part of normal economic life. And that's where I think many modern discussions around gold miss the mark. When many people ask what it would be like to spend a gold coin, they're immediately imagining trying to buy a loaf of bread or a can of beans with a 1 ounce gold coin. But historically, that was not the role of gold. Gold wasn't replacing copper, it wasn't replacing the small silver coins, it sat above those denominations. Copper handled the smallest purchases, silver handled many of the day-to-day transactions, and gold handled larger, more meaningful purchases. Now let's fast forward to today. A British sovereign contains 0.2354 ounces of gold. A 20 franc coin contains 0.1867 ounces of gold. And of course, the modern quarter ounces contain exactly a quarter of an ounce. Depending on the current price of gold, these coins are somewhere worth about $1,000. And that's where things become really interesting, because what does $1,000 buy you today? A major car repair, a utility trailer, a generator, insurance deductible, an appliance, a plane ticket. Maybe two of them could be a month's worth of rent. These aren't purchases we're making every day, but again, they are not unusual either. Most people will encounter transactions of this size on a somewhat regular basis throughout their lives, and that's what caught my attention. The economic role of these coins hasn't fully disappeared. Of course, the exact numbers have changed. These currencies have changed. We're no longer talking about a $5 gold coin, we're talking about $1,000. And these payment methods have changed for the most part, but the size of the transaction remains surprisingly familiar. Now, let's take this one step further. Imagine a period of what we're going to call a severe monetary instability. Maybe it's a banking crisis, maybe it's a prolonged power outage, or a regional disaster, maybe something else entirely. Whatever the scenario is, let's imagine that electronic payment systems become completely unreliable. The first thing people usually say is that gold would be useless. You can't buy groceries with gold. And honestly, they're probably right. You wouldn't want to buy a single loaf of bread for a quarter ounce eagle. But again, that's the wrong comparison. The better question is, what kinds of transactions would still exist? Would people still need generators? Absolutely. Would they still need vehicle repairs? Of course. Would people still buy and sell livestock? Would people still be purchasing tools, still be paying rent? Would people still be purchasing construction materials or still trade for equipment? I think the answer is yes across the board. And those are exactly the kinds of transactions where $1,000 worth of value starts making a lot of sense. In other words, the role these coins played historically isn't all that different from the role they might play in a modern barter economy. Not daily spending, not long term wealth storage, but transactional gold. And this is why I've become so fascinated with this category of coins. Because when I look at sovereigns, when I look at 20 franc pieces or a half eagle or these quarter ounce modern gold pieces, I don't just see them as gold. I see a pattern that appears over and over throughout monetary history. Different countries, different cultures, different economies, yet they repeatedly settle on roughly the same amount of gold. And that's worth paying attention to. Maybe it was a common wage. Maybe it was the trade. Maybe it was just convenience. Maybe markets simply discovered a sweet spot between purchasing power and practicality. I don't know for sure, but what I do know is when multiple societies repeatedly arrive at the same solution, there's usually a reason. And perhaps that's the biggest lesson I've taken away from studying these coins. Maybe gold isn't impractical for barter. Maybe we've simply become accustomed to thinking about the wrong size. Because when gold actually circulated as money, it was not usually a 1 ounce gold coin. It was often something much closer to what you're looking at here right now. Coins containing roughly 1/5 to 1/4 of an ounce of gold. Coins that represented meaningful transactions. Coins that actually circulated. Coins that actually worked. Now, this isn't financial advice. I'm not saying everyone should run out and go buy a bunch of quarter ounce golds. I'm simply sharing an observation and a finding that I find fascinating. A reoccurring pattern that appears throughout monetary history, and the more I study it, the harder it becomes to ignore. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think gold is practical for transactions at all? Do you think the 1/5 to 1/4 ounce range was the historical sweet spot? And if gold ever circulated again, what size coin do you think would be most useful? And are you stacking that? If you like the video, make sure to go hit the thumbs up button, go to the comment section to continue or start a conversation, share the video with someone you think may like it, and subscribe if you haven't already. To my long-term subscribers, thank you for your continual support, and remember to go check out my website at josephsreserves.com for any merchandise, zip-up bags, and the It's Today Again coffee. Remember that you can always write me at my P.O. box, but most of all, thank you so much for watching. And just remember, every ounce adds up, so no matter how small, just keep stacking.